They called me the help. Never to my face. Too polished for that. But I heard the whispers, saw the looks, felt the chill when I entered rooms. She has a nice smile for someone with a service background. No lineage, no legacy, but she's polite. Did you see her shoes? Clearly discount store. They tolerated me, until they didn't. My name is Grace Whitmore, 38 years old, born in Oregon to a public school teacher and a small-town mechanic. Raised in modest comfort, where dinner conversations centered on paying bills, not managing portfolios. Married into Manhattan's most exclusive old money family, the Barringtons. The Barringtons trace their lineage to railroad barons and shipping magnates. Their money was so old it had developed its own personality. Quiet, confident, ruthless when threatened. They owned buildings like other people owned cars. Their name opened doors that didn't even have handles for regular people. Carter Barrington made me believe none of that mattered. He said my independence was beautiful. Said my work ethic grounded him. Made him feel real in a world of inherited privileges and unearned respect. He claimed he was tired of women who saw him as a trust fund with legs. We met at a university alumni fundraiser. I was working the event as a marketing consultant for the firm that organized donor galas. 12-hour days. Minimum wage plus tips. Making sure rich people felt important while they wrote tax-deductible checks. He was the keynote donor's son, supposed to give a speech about giving back. Instead, he spent the evening following me around the cheese table asking about my work, my dreams, my thoughts on everything from modern art to affordable housing. "You're different," he said over champagne I couldn't afford to buy. "Different how? You actually listen when people talk. You don't just wait for your turn to speak." Our eyes met over imported brie and water crackers. Cliched but true. 6 months of coffee dates. Long walks through Central Park. Conversations that lasted until sunrise. He introduced me to wine that cost more than my rent. I introduced him to diners where the coffee was strong and the waitresses called everyone honey. 1 year later, we married in the Hamptons. White roses flown in from Ecuador. String quartet from Vienna. 200 guests who barely knew my name but gossiped about my background throughout the reception. I tried to fit in. God, how I tried. Wore the pearls that felt like nooses. Learned the difference between bone china and porcelain. Memorized every cousin's boarding school their trust fund amounts their carefully hidden scandals. Attended charity galas where people spent more on table arrangements than most families made in a year. I learned their language. Summering instead of vacation. The club instead of country club. Our people instead of friends. Everything spoken in code that separated insiders from everyone else. But I never belonged, never would. To them, I was the girl from the wrong side of everything. Wrong zip code, wrong pedigree, wrong everything. They measured worth in generations of wealth, and I was first-generation college graduate. They talked about family trees. Mine was barely a sapling. Still, I smiled. Hosted their dinner parties where conversations revolved around which politician they owned and which charity board needed their influence. I learned to nod at the right moments, laugh at jokes that weren't funny, and never mention my parents' jobs. I had their son, James, beautiful boy with Carter's blue eyes and my stubborn chin. For a moment I thought motherhood might change things. That blood would bridge the class divide. I was wrong. They took him to their club before he could walk. Had him fitted for tiny blazers and miniature boat shoes. Spoke to him in the same coded language that had excluded me. Our kind of people, darling. You'll understand when you're older. When James turned 3, Eleanor suggested I might be more comfortable if he spent afternoons with their nanny. A woman from a proper English household who understood appropriate child-rearing practices. Translation: I wasn't qualified to raise my own son. The divorce came after 5 years of suffocation. Carter said he was unfulfilled. His mother, Eleanor, said I was never truly one of us. The words cut deeper than I expected, mainly because I'd started believing them myself. We gave you everything, Eleanor said during our last conversation. And you never appreciated it. I appreciated the prison sentence, I replied. I just wanted time off for good behavior. They hired the city's most ruthless lawyers. White shoe firm that specialized in protecting old money from new problems. They painted me as unstable, unfit. A gold digger who'd manipulated their son and now wanted to corrupt their grandson. They had evidence. Photos of me crying in grocery stores after particularly brutal family dinners. Records of therapy sessions after my father's death. Normal grief twisted into mental instability. They documented every time I'd seemed overwhelmed at social events, every moment I'd struggled with their expectations. They hired private investigators who found unpaid parking tickets and late credit card payments from my college years. They interviewed former colleagues who confirmed I'd always seemed angry about something. They built a case that portrayed me as resentful, unstable, and dangerous to a child's proper development. The custody hearing was medieval. They paraded character witnesses who testified about my inappropriate reactions to family traditions, how I'd seemed uncomfortable at exclusive events, how I'd asked too many questions about family business practices. They didn't want shared custody. They wanted me erased, deleted from their son's life like an embarrassing photograph. The judge was a country club friend of Henry Barrington's father. The decision was predetermined. I was awarded visitation rights, twice a month, supervised, like I was dangerous, like I might corrupt their precious bloodline with my middle-class germs. I was gutted, hollowed out, destroyed in ways I didn't know were possible, but not defeated. I moved out with one suitcase and a settlement that wouldn't cover 6 months' rent in Manhattan. Left behind the Barrington estate with its marble staircases and oil paintings of dead patriarchs. The country clubs where they'd never learned my name. The suffocating expectations that had nearly killed my spirit. Rented a 1-bedroom in Brooklyn, Prospect Heights. Diverse neighborhood where people worked real jobs and talked about real problems. Started over at 35 with nothing but rage and determination. The rage was useful. It kept me warm during that first winter when I couldn't afford to heat the apartment properly. It fueled me through 18-hour workdays rebuilding my career. It reminded me that I was worth more than their judgment. What they didn't know changed everything. Before becoming Mrs. Barrington, I'd built a real estate firm with my college roommate, Sarah. We specialized in converting old buildings into sustainable housing. Small projects with good margins. We found neglected properties, saw their potential, and created homes for working families. We called it second chance properties. We bought buildings others considered hopeless and transformed them into communities. Added solar panels, updated electrical systems, created affordable housing that didn't look like punishment for being poor. When I married Carter, I sold my share to Sarah for a fraction of its worth. I wanted to be the perfect wife. Wanted to prove I could prioritize family over career. Wanted to show the Barringtons I wasn't just another ambitious climber. Biggest mistake of my life, but I never stopped investing. Privately, quietly, through shell companies they'd never trace to Grace Whitmore. I used my settlement money as seed capital, bought distressed properties, fixed them up, sold them for profits I immediately reinvested. For 3 years after the divorce, I lived small. Worked freelance marketing during the day, managed renovations at night. Visited my son twice a month in their sterile, supervised visits at a family court building that smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. James grew distant during those visits, confused. They'd told him I was unwell, that I needed space to heal, that Daddy's family was taking care of him while Mommy figured out how to be better. He started calling me Grace instead of Mom, started asking if I had enough money for food, started bringing me small gifts from the Barrington estate like I was a charity case. Those visits nearly broke me, but they also focused me. I started hunting. Real estate markets, investment opportunities, specifically Barrington properties. They owned half the Upper East Side through various trusts and holdings. Old money, old buildings, old ways of thinking that made them vulnerable to new strategies. I studied their portfolio like a general planning an invasion. Found properties they'd inherited and ignored. Buildings generating minimal income because they couldn't be bothered with management. Real estate held for sentimental value rather than financial sense. Then it happened. A historic apartment building came on the market. 6 stories. Pre-war bones. Limestone facade. Owned by the Barrington Family Trust for 40 years. They were quietly liquidating assets. Eleanor's cancer treatments weren't covered by insurance, though they'd never admit financial strain to their social circle. The building wasn't just any property. It was their ancestral gathering place, where every Thanksgiving happened, every Christmas morning, every celebration of their superiority over common people. Eleanor called it the beating heart of our family. Carter had proposed to his first fiancée in the rooftop garden. The asking price was reasonable. Too reasonable. They needed cash fast and couldn't wait for the right buyer. Perfect opportunity for someone with liquid capital and no emotional attachment. They had no idea who submitted the winning bid. Just a clean LLC called Meridian Holdings. Delaware Incorporation. Excellent credit. No financing contingencies. Generous offer that closed in 6 weeks without inspection complaints. The seller, Barrington Family Trust. The buyer, me. I waited 18 months. Let them plan their celebrations. Let them feel secure in their traditions. Let them think they'd won our war. Let them believe I disappeared into Brooklyn obscurity where I belonged. During those months, I renovated the building carefully. Preserved the historical elements they loved while updating systems they'd neglected. Added energy-efficient windows. Modernized plumbing. Created beautiful functional spaces they'd appreciate if they weren't about to lose them. I also investigated their finances. Hired the same private detectives they'd used against me. Discovered Henry's gambling debts. Carter's cocaine problem. Eleanor's experimental cancer treatments in Switzerland that cost more than small countries' GDP. They were bleeding money, but too proud to admit it. Too invested in appearances to make smart financial decisions. Perfect targets for someone patient enough to wait for the right moment. Then came Thanksgiving 2023. I walked through the marble foyer in black heels and a tailored navy suit. Tom Ford. Same designer Eleanor favored. Hair pinned back in the severe chignon she'd once told me made me look too severe for family gatherings. Lawyer beside me. Marcus Webb from the firm that specialized in real estate law and didn't give discounts to old money. They were in the main dining hall. 3 generations of Barringtons plus various hangers-on who'd married into the family or bought their way into the inner circle. toasting with gold-rimmed glasses filled with champagne that cost more than most people's monthly salaries. The conversation stopped when I appeared. Carter's second wife, a blonde socialite named Muffy who collected art and anxiety disorders, actually gasped. Carter's brother Edmund choked on his drink. Someone's phone clattered to the floor. Carter blinked rapidly. Eleanor's champagne glass trembled. Carter's father Henry actually stepped backward like I was armed. "Grace," Carter's voice cracked. "What are you doing here?" I smiled. The same polite smile they'd endured for years. The one that had driven them crazy because they could never find fault with it. "Checking on my building." Gasps, confused whispers. Someone dropped silverware onto their plate with a sound like breaking bones. I handed Eleanor a leather portfolio. Her mace, same brand she carried. The deed. "As of last month, this property belongs to Meridian Holdings. That's me." She opened it with shaking hands. Read the first page. Her face went from pale to gray to something approaching green. "This is impossible." "No, Eleanor. Impossible was thinking I'd stay small forever." Chaos erupted. Voices rising. Someone called their lawyer on speed dial. Henry demanded to see the paperwork. Carter stood frozen, staring at me like I was a ghost who'd learned corporate law. "How?" Eleanor whispered. Carefully, legally, strategically. I straightened my jacket. "You taught me that money talks. I learned to listen." I explained, not gloating. Just facts delivered in the same calm tone they'd used to explain why I wasn't suitable for their family. The shell company. The years of careful investment. The patient accumulation of capital while they assumed I was struggling to survive. "You planned this," Henry accused. "I adapted to circumstances you created. The sale was fraudulent." Edmund sputtered. "Feel free to challenge it in court. I have excellent lawyers now. They tried every angle. Threatened lawsuits that would bankrupt me. Claimed emotional distress. Insisted I was mentally unfit to own property. But everything was legal. Clean. Unbreakable. Marcus had made sure of that." "You did this for revenge," Carter finally spoke. I turned to him. "My ex-husband, father of my son. The man who'd chosen his family's approval over our marriage and my dignity. I did this so your son grows up knowing his mother doesn't bow her head." That night I didn't evict them, didn't change the locks, didn't gloat over their shock and humiliation. Simply announced that the building would be renovated, converted to mixed-income housing and nonprofit spaces. Community art center on the ground floor. Affordable studios for young families on the upper floors. The Barringtons would need a new venue for their gatherings. "Where will we go?" Eleanor's voice was small, broken, the voice of someone whose world had just shifted beneath her feet. "I hear there are lovely event spaces in New Jersey." The following months were brutal for them. The custody battle was swift and decisive. My lawyer argued that financial stability and property ownership demonstrated my fitness as a parent. The Barrington family's declining finances and Henry's gambling debts suggested an unstable environment for a child. The judge who'd originally sided with old money now faced new realities. I had asset stability and a clear vision for my son's future. They had declining portfolios and increasing desperation. Primary custody was awarded to me. Now I see James every day after school. He climbs 6 flights to my office in the building where his family once looked down on me. He does homework at the desk where I plan community programs and manage my growing real estate portfolio. He asks questions about business, about standing up for yourself, about the difference between inherited wealth and earned respect. He's learning that success isn't about where you start, but what you build along the way. Last week, he said something that stopped me cold. "Mom, when I grow up, I want to build things like you." The Barringtons still gather for holidays. In rented spaces, smaller crowds, subdued conversations about temporary setbacks and market corrections. They've had to sell other properties, downsize their lifestyle, face the reality that money without strategy eventually disappears. Eleanor sent me a letter last month, handwritten on letterhead that no longer impressed me. "Grace, I underestimated you. I hope you can forgive an old woman's prejudices." I haven't responded. Some apologies come too late. Some wounds don't heal just because the person who caused them finally understands what they did. But I kept the letter. Not for forgiveness, for proof. Proof that I may not have been born into legacy, but I built one. Brick by brick. Investment by investment. Choice by choice. While they relied on inherited advantages, I created sustainable value. My building stands on the Upper East Side. 6 stories of second chances and new beginnings. A monument to the fact that sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction, it's construction. And every morning when my son and I walk past the doorman, who once wouldn't meet my eyes, I remember something my mother told me years ago. "Grace, they can take your house. They can take your money. They can even take your children for a while, but they can never take what you build in here." She tapped her temple. "And here." She touched her heart. They learned that lesson the hard way. I made sure of it.